Welcome everyone to ScienceHolic's November webinar. My name is Scarlett Chu. I'm the Communications Director for ScienceHolic, and I will be the host of today's webinar. Joyce, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Joyce. I'm the co-founder of ScienceHolic. Molly is the other co-founder and she cannot be here because of some other commitments. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this webinar.
We're very happy today to have invited Dr. Hakim, an OBGYN doctor based in Canada, to be our guest today. Thank you, Dr. Hakim, for spending early mornings hours with us.
You're welcome. It's my privilege.
Before we to start this webinar, let's invite Dr. Hakim to give a brief introduction about herself, her work, and what she does currently. Dr. Hakim, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, guys. It was lovely. It is lovely to be here with you, and it's a real privilege to speak with you guys today. So I'll give you kind of the two-liner about me. So I'm an OBGYN that was certified both in Canada and the U.S. I currently reside in Houston, Texas. I did my medical school and residency in French in Canada, and then came to Houston to subspecialize, so do 2 extra years of just focusing on pediatric gynecology. So I'm an assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine and Texas Children's Hospital. The other part of my job, besides seeing patients and doing clinical work, is doing basic science work. So I run an all-female lab at Texas Children's Hospital, and we're focused most specifically on the vagina and vaginal wound healing in specific. So I have 2 lovely women that work with me, and we do very innovative translational work in the lab. I also co-founded Femtech Focus. So Femtech Focus is a not-for-profit that is empowering the femtech industry. I also started Somos GYN, which is Instagram and online gynecology platform targeting specifically delivering gynecology content aimed at teenage girls and their families, most specifically in Spanish. Previously in medical school, I founded a nonprofit called Tumaini Children's Project, which actually was a not-for-profit that supported an orphanage and 50 kids that lived on site in Kisumu, Kenya. And I am the inventor of a Femtech device that is going to a clinical trial later this year.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we move on to the questions, I'd like to give a brief introduction of what ScienceHolic does as an organization. So we are a youth-run nonprofit that aims to introduce intricate scientific topics in a manner that is fun and comprehensive to teens. Our main purpose is to serve as a free resource for students to learn more about science topics, and we strive for our teenage readers and contributors to be critical thinkers and promote thought-provoking conversations. We provide various opportunities for students around the world with English as their second language to expand their English ability, and we also provide volunteer and leadership opportunities to those who want to help others. One last thing before we start, to the attendees, if you have any questions you have for Dr. Hakim, please send them into the chat. We'll try to go over them at the end of the webinar if they haven't already been answered or covered within the Q&A section. Now, let's begin. Our first area that our questions are going to cover is about Dr. Hakim's profession as a female OBGYN doctor. So Dr. Hakim, what first sparked your interest in gynecology and a path in medicine?
That is a really great first question. I think the little graphic that you put there is a great place to start. I can speak for myself that as a child, was always a very busy child, meaning that I explored a lot of different avenues, from music to science to sports. and was always super curious about science and biology and medicine. And so I knew that there was something there that I wanted to understand further. What I also realized as I went through high school was that I particularly liked connecting through stories. That was the most important way that I connected in terms of my words and in terms of feelings. So I had these two different passions. I had medicine and biology, and I also had connecting at a human level that I found really satisfying. And then I think, to speak to your graphic, you know, to understand who you are and what you want to bring to the world is really important, and what you love. And what I realized is that I wanted to create a bigger impact, not only just as a one-on-one conversation, but a larger impact. And I felt like medicine was the way that I was going to be able to achieve those goals. What I love specifically about gynecology is that I really love being part of a woman's journey through her lifetime. I think there's something very powerful about that. I think there's something very powerful about advocating amongst women and cheerleading for women and championing them as they go through their life journeys, either from childhood to adolescence to later on in their reproductive years. So I discovered that some of the values that I really enjoyed were those that involved championing and serving, and all of that connected back to medicine, and then connected to my absolute just passion about women. And so that's where gynecology came from. I think to take that back to how that could be applicable to you and your audience. The other part, medicine is a very broad field, and impacting and creating impact for women is also very broad. And so to really understand why somebody would go into gynecology or go into medicine, really have to understand a lot more deeply about yourself. And I also realized that I was a very problem and solution oriented person. So I also really liked working with my hands. So I knew that I wanted to do something where I was going to be able to operate. That to me was something that was very important because I enjoy creating solutions to problems. So there's a mass in the pelvis, we have to take it out. I enjoy that creative aspect of surgery. So for all of those reasons, gynecology was the right choice for me, and medicine in specific was the right choice as well. But it may not be for everybody.
Brilliant answer. I like how you incorporate the creative aspects of medicine and gynecology into, you know, a very STEM focused career, because some people might perceive STEM careers as quite limiting and restrictive and devoid of, you know, the creative aspects of it. Mm-hmm. But I do believe a career in STEM does require skills that you might require also in humanities subjects. So thank you so much for the answer. You covered briefly about your favorite parts of being an OBGYN gynecologist, but is there one experience about being one that you find really memorable? Like what's the first experience that pops up in memory, that pops up in your head?
There are certainly, you know, of course, everyone who's a OBGYN is going to remember their first delivery. You know, that first moment where you were the doctor and you had to make the decisions and you were responsible. I think those are always very humbling moments where you realize that all of your training, everything that you've worked for led to that moment, you know, to have your first delivery, to have your first time where you were intimately involved in somebody's most memorable moment, and to feel that honor is certainly something that I'll always remember. I do think that stepping back from that, again, to interweave the science and the storytelling and the connecting on a human level, I think the most memorable portion of my job is, for example, I'm thinking of a patient right now who is, she's now in her 20s, but she was a young lady at age 11 when I first met her, and she had a large tumor that was on her ovary that we had to remove. And so I not only got to have the privilege of being involved in her surgery and removing her cancer, and then helping her through the challenges of having one ovary and having to go through chemotherapy, to then surviving her cancer and now being a young woman who wants to explore the world. And I have the privilege of being involved in her life in terms of navigating puberty and life journeys and contraception and partners and, you know, pap smears and all the other things that come along with growing up as a woman. And so I've gotten to see and be a part of her life through an incredible journey. And that to me is the most memorable thing. And I think when the times are challenging, because they're challenging in every field, it's those experiences that I remember and take joy in and remember why I'm doing this.
That's a very inspiring answer. It must feel amazing to know that you played such a vital role in someone's life, and no matter in what stage, and know that you possibly positively impacted them and helped them throughout their way in life. It must be an amazing feeling.
It is an amazing feeling. And it's a very, like I said, it's a very humbling feeling. And it's a very joyful one as well, to think that, you know, all of the textbook learning really goes into that one patient, you know, and throughout her entire experience, everything that I've learned and everything that you've learned to communicate, not only you can have the textbook knowledge, but you have to be able to share it in a way that is meaningful and correct, and pick the best option for her and help her to, you know, be the best person she can be through all her challenges. That's the joy of medicine.
That is very true. So as a, I'm sorry about the disruption back then, but as a female doctor in a largely male-dominated field, what do you think about the lack of female representation in the medical or STEM fields? What do you think that we as a society can do about it, whether it's students or adults?
So I think this is changing more and more. I do think that there are much more women in medicine, a lot more women coming into the STEM fields, especially women who traditionally may not have entered those fields. Underrepresented sectors of and communities are now joining medicine and STEM fields more and more. So I do think that's changing, and it's absolutely wonderful. And what I think women are great at doing is creating their own momentum. I think we all have a real sense of community. And the more we enter these fields and talk about the experiences we're having, talk about the impact we're making, encourage other women to join, I think more and more women are coming along and joining that active creation of momentum, and paving the path for the women and girls to come behind us. So I think what we can do as a society is women amongst ourselves. I think the more that we champion each other, the more that we build each other up, highlight the women who are doing amazing things. And so to showcase for other young girls coming up that this is possible, this is something that is enjoyable. STEM doesn't have to be something scary. STEM doesn't have to mean you're, pigeonholed into one aspect of a job cycle. I do think getting a mentor is really, really important for young people, or seeking out mentors. I can't tell you how meaningful and how important mentoring is to me, and has been and currently still is, to find and surround yourself with women who you see things about them that you want to emulate. Either you are want to know more about what they do for work, or there's a certain aspect of what they do, maybe it's not even in STEM, that you want to, embody or learn about, or act similarly. Surround yourself with those people and ask questions. Those are the women that will champion you further. And I also think that women are starting to say more and more about what they need to be successful. So women in STEM and women in medicine, it's traditionally been a challenging environment, right? Because the workload was very hard. It was very hard for women to have the same type of platform, the same type of, even as of 30 years ago, women had to go into different locker rooms, or they weren't, places to hang even their white coats, like it was just a whole other world. And now you're seeing women who maybe need to balance work life and family life and don't have a place to breastfeed or pump in their jobs. And more, I think women are speaking up about what they need to be successful in this field because they deserve to be there.
It is important for women to all work together to improve certain fields, especially in STEM fields, because there's still this stigma, there's still the perception that maybe only males can do certain jobs. Like I personally, I haven't really heard about any female engineers. I'm sure there are around in the world, but I'm quite the ratio between male and female in that specific job, I'm sure it's much more male dominated. So I do think as women and females, we need to advocate more for our capability in doing these jobs. So,
absolutely. Because there are women engineers for sure who are doing just amazing things. So I think, again, what you're doing here by bringing in people who can showcase what they've done and their journey that they've gone through, so that you can have, and your group can have the ability to see somebody who's doing something different, and also seek their mentoring. I think those are really powerful steps that you guys are taking so that you can see what is possible as well.
Let's move on. Let's now talk about some of the nonprofits that Dr. Hakim has started and are currently leading. One of which she has mentioned before, is Femtech Focus. It is a nonprofit that empowers the femtech industry through increasing the awareness of femtech in the tech world. They provide resources to femtech founders and create opportunities to support femtech startups through different mediums. Their goal is to make femtech a universally recognized industry through their different outreach programs by, for example, increasing the amounts of capital invested by these startups through investor relations, or hosting a marketplace website consolidating the resources available to women's health and wellness industry. So where did you get the idea of starting Femtech Focus, this nonprofit?
So I think this is a great question, and the way that I can answer it is bringing in themes that I've already touched on a little bit. The first one is talking and seeking mentors. The second one is finding a place and a space where you feel passionate. And the third one is looking for opportunities. So all of these three things came together to start Femtech Focus. So the first one is seeking mentors. And my co-founder, Brittany Barreto, is just an amazing woman. And I sought her out as a mentor. We were taking a class together, or actually, sorry, I was attending a class and she was a speaker in the class. And I felt extremely drawn to her, her passion when she was speaking and what she was giving a lecture on. And I went to talk to her afterwards and just asked if I could, have a meeting with her, take her for coffee, just to chat. I had no idea that 3 years later we would be starting a nonprofit together. But that's how easy it is to find mentors. If you find somebody that you really feel very called to, there's something about them, there's some quality they have, there's some passion that they have that you would like to explore more of, just ask. So first of all, mentoring is what connected Britt and I. The second one was finding a space that I felt passionate about. I felt very passionate about science, women, and innovation. And basically all of those come into play in terms of the femtech industry. So I found a place where I was very passionate, and I was able to share that passion with Britt when we first were talking. And in the 3 years, we both became equally passionate about this space. And then third of all, we recognized there was an opportunity there, that femtech really wasn't, even the noun, the word femtech wasn't really known even a few years ago. We recognized there was an opportunity in terms of this area. So women's wellness, women's health in general, innovation, women in STEM, all of this connection needed championing and needed a voice. And also there was a lot of market opportunities within that nexus. So it was all of those three things that came together: finding a mentor, finding a place that you felt passionate, and finding an opportunity to expand on that passion that not only felt good to both Britt and I, but felt good to the world and felt good to investors. And then moving it forward into Femtech Focus. So it was those three things that just came together.
That's a very well completed, like, it's very well, the reasons really come together so perfectly. And then Femtech Focus is just one medium that does all of what you just said. It's very amazing. So this is kind of similar to the questions earlier about the lack of the female representation, but you also just mentioned that femtech as a verb, as a noun, wasn't very well known even like a couple years back. So what do you think is the reason behind this lack of awareness and resources within the femtech industry?
So you're right. I think even a few years ago, even still now, it has been and will continue to be a change in momentum. So I think, women's health and wellness, and especially discussing women's needs and the issues that women face, was traditionally seen as something that was a bit uncomfortable. You could get as basic as, again, there's not a place for women to pump breast milk comfortably at work, to even advertising on social media. You couldn't show portions of a female body because it was considered to be, too uncomfortable for other people. Or, menstrual fluid can only look blue and it can't really look red because we don't want to make people uncomfortable. So I think there was generally a discomfort around women's needs and the issues that women were facing. And it traditionally was also not seen as lucrative. I think investors were not interested in this space because it wasn't seen as something where they could get a return on their investment easily. And also it was seen as something that was niche, right? Oh, it's a women's product, so it's going to be a niche market, and therefore not something that we want to invest our time and energy in. What I think we're seeing is a complete reversal of all of those three things. So not only are women becoming much more vocal and much more comfortable, and not only women, but the, society at large is becoming much more comfortable with the discussions. Not to say that there's not a lot of work to do still, but I think the discussions and the comfort with women expressing what they need and saying what the issues are that they're facing is becoming a much more accepted conversation. It's also not being seen as niche anymore. We're 51% of the population with a huge purchasing power. So I do think that investors are seeing that a lot of healthcare decisions are being made by women, and that this is a group that needs to be paid attention to. And not only that, we're not seen as niche anymore, right? Where we are a huge sector, we're, half the population, and we have purchasing power and we have needs. And so, and we're not shy anymore about saying what we're experiencing and what is working and what's not working for us. And so I think all of these things traditionally were the reasons that there wasn't a lot of awareness in this industry, and is now the reasons that we're changing that momentum into a different direction. So I think, that's exactly what Femtech Focus is trying to do, right? Connect investors, founders, women, and people who have ideas. It doesn't necessarily have to be women founders only, but founders who are interested in the women's health space. And then, you know, connecting all of these and recognizing that there is a market, that there's an opportunity, that there's growth potential, and that there's need.
Okay, so about the Tumaini's Children's Project, another nonprofit that Dr. Hakim has founded and is leading. They are an international youth-focused nonprofit organization that provides hope and opportunity to orphaned Kenyan children affected by HIV or AIDS. The nonprofit cares for them and educates them also implements sustainable development projects so that they can have results in the long term. They also started a community e-learning center and library for the children, and they have benefited over 600 AIDS orphans and 100 AIDS widows in a rural village outside of Kisumu, Kenya. Tumaini's Children's Project is obviously a project that is located outside of where you reside or where you're based on. So with regards of their location and the time commitments, what were some difficulties of starting this nonprofit project?
You know, it's a really great question, and there's so many layers to this answer. But I'll come back to sort of again, and I hope you'll notice that in life there are many themes that keep coming back, and it's a matter of seeing those themes and kind of recognizing them when they're happening. So the theme was, I found something I was passionate about. I was in medical school, and I don't want to say I was bored in medical school, because certainly medical school is not boring in any way. There was a lot to do, but I felt that I wanted to create a larger impact than what I was creating while I was just studying with my textbooks. I had the opportunity to go to Kenya to do a medical elective, and I found a place that I was very passionate about, and I found women and children's needs that were being largely underserved, and I felt extremely called to be there and very passionate about doing any part of something to make their journeys better. So number one, I found something I was passionate about and I followed it. Number two, the focus on education for me has always been very important. I'm a first generation. My parents were not born in Canada, or my father came from Egypt and struggled to come here. And he came here because he got a scholarship. And I don't know why he got a scholarship and the next person next to him didn't, but for some reason, you know, he got the scholarship. And I have always felt that him having that opportunity to come here and pursue his education obviously was life-changing for him, life-changing for our family. And I felt very passionate about giving back that opportunity to some other child who, you know, the chance to go to school might change their entire direction, their family's trajectory, and maybe even their community's trajectory. So I connected my values of giving back and education. I connected a passion that I found that I wanted to create service and opportunities for young people. And then I sought out mentors, because as you can imagine, in medical school, I had no idea how to start a nonprofit. That wasn't something they teach you in medical school. But what I was able to do was connect a story, right? So again, you'll see the theme of stories. So what is storytelling? Storytelling is just a way to connect people to the vision that you have. So I had this vision of what I wanted to accomplish for these children and for these women. And I just started talking. So I would sell my vision by creating a story around what I wanted to accomplish and who was going to be the beneficiary, and brought mentors to me, because obviously I needed advice about how to start a nonprofit. You needed to have board members, you needed to be registered. I needed board members in Kenya. I needed people to facilitate what we were going to do in Kenya and facilitate the fundraising and organization on the ground in Canada. So all of that stuff I did while I was in medical school, but really the themes come back to the same three things or four things, right? You find a passion, you connect your why, right? What are your values? Because those values will get you through the hard times, because trust me, there were hard times. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, right? Who have things that you don't know or want to emulate. So you bring mentors around you, you connect the story, you sell the vision, you build it. And then you try and grow it as much as you can, and recognize also the other part that I had to recognize is that when it got too big for just me. So I think you also have to recognize when your skill set ends, and who else you can bring on to take over from you. So it's kind of those same themes over and over of creating something that is wonderful. Really comes down to those four themes. I could get more granular for you in terms of some of the challenges. Of course, there were lots, time commitments, balancing all of that, balancing the needs of those kids and balancing my own educational needs, trying to figure out how to manage programming in different languages, in different cultures that wasn't my own, and translating that programming into something that I could fundraise around in North America, then doing the fundraising, then keeping it sustainable, then scaling it and growing it. You know, there were lots of challenges for sure. But again, if you take it at a high level, it comes back to those four themes.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very inspiring to hear about going so far to reach out to another country to work for a cause that you're so passionate about. About the next question. Sorry, I must have accidentally deleted a question, but I was on the next question from my memory was asking you about why you chose Kenya as a target beneficiaries of this project, but I feel like you already talked about that quite a lot in your previous answer. So I would like to change the question a little bit and ask about your elective in Kenya. You went to Kenya the first time due to because of a medical elective. Would you mind expanding a little bit about that? Because that's something I've never really heard of before.
Certainly, yeah. So in our medical school, we had the opportunity to go overseas. Again, there was a champion, right? So again, it comes back to seeking out the people who you want to surround yourself with. So there were a few physicians in the ecosystem around my medical school that went back and forth to various countries overseas to do missions or to work in the community or provide a service. Or whatever, we're somehow connected in another community. And so I actively sought out some of those people because I was very interested in international medicine. I think the part of my story that I left out for you was that I didn't get into medical school in a very straightforward path. So my background is actually not in science, but it's actually in African studies. So that's what I did my undergrad in, because pre-med was not an easy path for me. I actually did not do well my first year of pre-med and switched tracks completely into African studies, thinking that medicine was off the table for me. Because I got a few bad marks in my first year of pre-med, and I thought this killed my chances to go to medical school. So I switched tracks completely into a path that I felt passionate about. I love the intersection of culture and economics and political science and health. And so I thought I was going to go work for UNICEF. And so I switched into African studies. So again, now coming back to medical school, I finally was in medical school and I sought out those people who were doing work overseas because I felt very passionate about that. still. And so that's how I got involved in going to Kenya. So there was somebody around our medical school who went to Kenya, and I ended up figuring out how to get an elective over there that would count as credit to the medical school. So again, if you want something, you'll figure out a way to make it happen. And it was a matter of, you know, asking the right questions and saying what I was going to learn over there, and then finding that person to help me set up the elective, because obviously I had to go and rotate in a hospital. And so I was in the pediatrics ward and the OBGYN ward in a small provincial hospital in Kisumu. And that was a very eye-opening experience. So, I mean, I highly, highly recommend exactly what you're doing. Seek out, you know, the experiences of others. And if you can travel, do so.
I just want to like jump in and ask a quick question. So I know that obviously, as you talked about being like a full-time doctor and also like owning a lab, it probably requires a lot of like energy, like both physically and mentally. And like from my own experience, you know, trying to operate a nonprofit is really time consuming as well. I wondered, do you mind explaining like how do you balance your time there?
Sure. Yes, it is hard. And I think it's a great question. And I would say it's a question that a lot of people, your stage, my stage, the stage beyond, are always trying to figure out that question. How do you balance all the energy that's required for the things that you're passionate about and the projects that you're involved in, and balancing the rest of your life? Like, that's a great question that I think never has an end, right? It's always going to be an evolution of that answer. The best way that I can explain how I manage, yes, doing clinical work, running a lab, running, you know, being a part of Femtech Focus, also doing so much GYN, then also having, you know, life outside of those 4 areas. Yes, it's very time consuming. And it does take deliberate intentionality. I think that is the best way that I can put it for you. So I can give you the brief rundown. Essentially, I have a success formula that I've worked on. And I think each person, as you go through your life, will develop your own success formula. What works for you and what doesn't work for you. So I'll give you a brief overview of it. I know that for myself, I operate best when I get enough sleep. So I work backwards from how much sleep do I need to perform optimally, and then everything else has to fall into the rest of the hours of the day. Because if I'm not getting enough sleep consistently, then everything else is going to fall apart. So that's, to me, the number one thing. How much sleep do I need to perform and feel the best? So then you only have a certain other, you know, let's say you need 7 hours of sleep a night. Okay, then you only have X number of hours left in the day to work with. Okay, so then you start from there. So now I have that many hours in the day. And then I know that the first thing that I need to do when I wake up in the morning to feel my best is that I take 10 minutes to meditate, because that helps me. And I know that I perform the best when my mind is clear. And then I immediately need to go and exercise, because I feel that I'm the most awake and the most open in my brain after I've like gotten my heart rate up and sweated in the morning. That to me is what works the best. Then I will say that I organize my week in a very deliberate fashion. So I have different activities that I try and only do on certain days. To me, that's something called concept stacking. And there's a lot of books and resources about being efficient and maximizing your efficiency. And that is one thing that's helped me a lot, in the sense that, so for example, on Mondays and part of Tuesdays, I only do clinical work. Then the rest of Tuesday is all basic science. Tuesday, Wednesday, and most of Thursday is basic science. Thursday is the only day that I try and hold meetings. So I just go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting on Thursday. And then Fridays is my Femtech day. Sundays is my Somos day. So I keep my days very organized. The reason that that helps me is that there's a lot, to me, task shifting is the time where I lose the most momentum. So if I have to shift my brain from basic science to clinic or from clinic to Femtech, that time that I have to get my brain wrapped in a different area has a lot of startup friction for me. So I lose a lot of time there to get like into the groove, if you know what I mean. So for me, I like my grooves to just happen on one day and then I just stick in that day. Do you know what I mean? So that to me helps me. So I know that on Fridays I'm only in Femtech and then my brain is already organized and ready for Femtech on Fridays. So I would say to me that, and that's the best way that I've organized myself. And then I just make sure that in the evenings, I really block time on my calendar and stick to it in terms of what are the other values of my life that are important, because there's a lot of other things besides work that are important, right? And there's a lot of other ways to create impact beyond being in STEM and beyond being in medicine, right? Some of that is the human connection that we all need, right? Either that's spending time with your family, spending time with your significant other, exploring some other creative outlet. Like there's something else that has to also feed your soul. And I consciously make time for those things because there's always going to be more work that you have. So it's a matter of being very deliberate in saying, this is where work ends and this is where I need time for me. So you have to be deliberate. I think if you want to move a lot of projects forward that you're passionate about, that you're right, take a lot of energy, you have to know how much energy you have to give and how much you need to, and what you need to do to replenish that energy during the day. And then be deliberate in setting up your days and weeks so that both of those things can happen.
That's a very important question that I think we should all address and think about more often. But there's also a really good transition to our next big area of questions, which are the more quote unquote miscellaneous questions, such as career paths and advice, such as like what we just talked about. So what would you say is the biggest piece of advice you'd give to high school students, which is the majority of our target audience, who would like to work in the STEM fields in the future?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I think it comes back again to a lot of the themes that we've already talked about, right? So I would say the first thing is to find something that you love, whether it's engineering, whether it's math, whether it's biology, whatever aspect of STEM, storytelling, whatever it is that you feel very passionate about, keep following that thing. I would say the second piece of advice is to expand your horizons as much as possible and get mentors. So the reason that I think that's important is that, and it was something that I believe you touched on, is that thinking, well, if I'm going to go into STEM, then this is the only career I'm going to have, or this is what my life is probably going to look like. And maybe I don't want that. So maybe I don't want STEM. But really, there are so many avenues in which people utilize their STEM degree or their STEM background into something very broad, right? And can create a really meaningful life and job that doesn't necessarily have to mean working in a lab if that's not something you want, or doesn't necessarily mean even having to go into medicine. There's a lot of ways to create impact and to have a joyful and rich life with a background in STEM as a woman. And I think the more you're exposed to other women doing those things that you want to emulate, the more you'll see opportunities for yourself of, okay, what do I really want my life to look like? So I would say, again, my number one thing is find something that you love and follow that. You know, whether it's organic growing vegetables, whether it's being outside, whether it's, you know, I love graphs and spreadsheets. and you can have it all, you know. That's the other thing that I want you guys to realize. Again, just because you love graphs and spreadsheets, but you don't love being in a lab and you don't know what else you could do with a love of graphs and spreadsheets, start talking to people, start getting exposed to what else is out there, because there's a lot of opportunities. So find what you love, find mentors, and surround yourself with people who are doing similar things that you love, that you can kind of have your mind expanded. Connect again to the values that you want to share with the world, right? What are the things that I want to do? I want to create an impact. I want to be a champion for somebody. I want to serve. Like, those are all very big goals, but you have to connect that why into what you want to do. Or maybe it's, I want to create the best medical device, or I want to, be a motivational speaker to other young people. And then I guess the final thing that I'll say is that there's a lot of ways to connect all of those things beyond necessarily sort of a quote unquote traditional path in medicine. So keep your minds broad when you're exploring in your phase, medicine is certainly a wonderful and very humbling and beautiful profession. But there are a lot of ways to create impact for people one-on-one and on a broader scale that don't necessarily involve going to medical school. So I would say just keep your minds as broad as possible. Try a lot of different things. Connect to people who you can ask questions to, and figure out what it is that you really find joy and you love doing, whether it's graphs or gardening or being outside, and then follow that, because you will be able to create a life around that.
Thank you so much. That's very inspiring. I see that through your social media accounts and your projects that you're very adamant on promoting mental health. So below you can find some guidance questions on the big question, which is, what's your view on mental health? Why is it important? How can we spread awareness about it? And especially for students, now we're going through this pandemic and a lot of us are enrolled in remote online learning. How can we maintain good mental health?
I think it's a great question, and I'm super glad that you asked this question, because you're right, it is something I'm very passionate about. I think, first of all, having a practice around your mental health, or having an awareness of mental health needs, both within yourself and with the people around you, your communities, your school friends, is so important, because you can only be your best self. You can only let all of your passions and geniuses and all the things that you want to create shine through when your mind and your heart is unencumbered, right? If you have a lot of anxieties or things holding you back, or uncomfortable feelings about yourself, a lot of that, you won't be able to be your best self and your healthiest self if you have a lot of that sort of, I don't want to just label it as mental clutter, but things that are really holding you back and making you feel sad or uncomfortable or less than. I also think that, and I know that especially for young people, especially for women who are young people, and especially for women who are young people who are finding their path through STEM, it's a very challenging area, right? And some of those challenges, as you've come up against, are like the themes of your questions. Where do I belong? How do I make a career for myself? How do I do that in a time of COVID? How do I figure out where I want to go with my life, as a bigger question? But also in the STEM field and in the medical field, for sure, there's a lot of incoming messaging about being less than, right? You're not good enough to get into medicine. You have to have the best grades. You have to have the biggest CV that's the most robust. And there's a lot of negative messaging that can really be hard it really can be hard to keep championing for yourself, keep cheerleading that I can do this, I can find a path. So all of that is really important to take time to address, even from your stage and younger and beyond. I think the more that we as women and women in STEM talk about some of the feelings that we all have experienced, the more comfortable those conversations become. The less people are afraid to have judgment or feel like they're the only people that must be going through some of those feelings, the more that other people will share. So I would say, if right now any of you are feeling like, wow, I have a lot of, emotions or a lot of negative thoughts about myself, my career path that I'm experiencing now, I would say now is the time to start talking about it, not to wait until it becomes, something even bigger. And I would say, I spent my whole career through medicine, through residency, through fellowship. Now I have always had coaches around me. So either a psychologist talking to me, because essentially a psychologist is really a coach who helps you to navigate some of the bigger questions and anxieties and ways of thinking that would be in your best interest to develop. So either having somebody to talk to who's kind of a third party who only has your best interests at heart, though having that support system is really important. And to find a person that you could talk to kind of unburden, but also to give you guidance is really, really important. Whether that's a family member, somebody that you trust, a friend or a coach, I would say find somebody that you can share what's going on and seek advice from. And so even right to this day, I have coaches surrounding me to help me be the best version of myself. And I have had that throughout, and it's been incredibly powerful for me. So I think the more you talk, the more any of us talks about what we're experiencing, the more that we seek out people who could, stand in our corner with us, will only help.
Thank you so much. It's especially during this time, mental health is more important than ever. And I really want to talk about this, especially with the audience of us being stressed with grades and work, and even amidst this learning remotely. It's difficult, it's new, but hopefully I think we can all get through this.
Absolutely.
We have a little bit of time before 9 for you, but just want to quickly ask this question because you speak English, French, and Swahili, and I think it's very amazing. And so when did you learn these languages, and how is being multilingual helpful to your work? Because for your Somos GYN account, you're also targeting Spanish-speaking families and spreading awareness for that. So would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. So I grew up speaking English. So English is my native language. French was not my native language, but I went to medical school and did my residency in French. And that's a whole other conversation about how I came to apply to medical school in a language I didn't speak, and the challenges of learning medicine and French at the same time was pretty significant. But I learned French because I had to, because I was in medical school in French. And so I had to figure out how to speak and learn. So I'm now fluent in French because I did my residency for 5 years in French and medical school for 4 years in French. So I speak French fluently. Kiswahili, I spoke fairly fluently when I was working very hard on Tumaini. So during medical school, I picked up Kiswahili because I spent a lot of time in Kenya working on the not-for-profit. I would say I'm not fluent now for sure, and I've lost a lot of it because I haven't used it in years. So I was at one point very fluent and could do a whole history, like take a patient's history in Swahili and talk to the kids in the orphanage in Swahili, and, you know, navigate being in Kenya basically in Swahili. But I've lost that since I haven't used it in a while. So now speaking Spanish, I am still learning Spanish. It's very hard, but it's hard because it takes effort, right? And anything that takes effort and time, as we all just talked about, there's only so many hours in the day and so much effort that you can give into any one thing. And so, yeah, I have Spanish teachers. I'm working on my Spanish. I try and take lessons. I actually take lessons 2 to 3 times a week. And I've found ways to be the most efficient with my time. So how do I find Spanish teachers that can work on my schedule? And so all of that's possible. Like I said, if you want something, I think that's the theme that I hope you can gather from this. When you really want something, you will find a way to make it happen, right? I didn't know that I was going to learn to speak French until I was forced to, you know, figure it out because I wanted to be in medicine. I didn't know that I was going to learn to speak Swahili until I was forced to, because I wanted to connect more when I was in Kenya. And certainly with my Latina patients here in Houston, I find that not speaking Spanish is something that really holds me back from connecting with them in the best way possible. And so I wanted to make sure that I learned to speak Spanish. And so all of these have been helpful journeys for me.
So with that, we finished questions that ScienceHolic has prepared. But if any of the attendees have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the chat now so we can cover it briefly before we wrap this webinar up. In the meantime, I would actually like to ask about, being that we are in this pandemic, how has COVID-19 affected your work? Like, how do you do your clinical lab work and all that now that you're maybe possibly lockdowns and all that?
Yeah, it was definitely very challenging at the beginning. So I think all of medicine shifted together, right? I think COVID forced everybody in medicine to realize that they could do things differently. So telemedicine, you know, definitely wasn't something that we were doing before COVID. And now suddenly all of the medical fields shifted into much more remote clinical work. So we do see still now, again, patients in person, but those spots are limited. And most of the patients that we see are on telemedicine. Now you can imagine in gynecology, there's only some things that you can do on telemedicine and some things really do need in-person visits. So I would say largely what shifted is that telemedicine is something that's much more done and acceptable, and actually is much more convenient for patients, truthfully, and protects us as healthcare workers as much as possible. Running the lab was certainly hard. We had to focus because certainly we weren't able to go into the lab and weren't able to work with a lot of our animals or do a lot of our cell work. So we had to refocus, but again, we got very intentional. We made a strategic plan. I think the more you plan, the more you have clarity, and the more you have clarity, the more you have direction and you know where you want to get to. So we focused a lot on what data we had already and what manuscripts we could write, even if we didn't have data, what we could prepare for, what classes we could take, you know, how we could keep going in the 3 months or so or 4 months where we were in lockdown, and we may come back to being in lockdown, I don't know. But yeah, things were definitely different, but I think great people rise and fall according to the challenges that are presented to them. This was just another challenge that we could either rise or we could stop our science. And we kind of had to choose which kind of humans and which kind of scientists we wanted to be.
Okay, thank you so much for answering. I see that there aren't any questions in the chat, and with time constraints, I think we are good to wrap this webinar up. Thank you, Dr. Hakim, for spending this hour with us in early Saturday morning. After hearing how hectic your work week is. It's I feel kind of bad a little bit, but we really appreciate you being here today.
Never feel bad. It was my absolute privilege, and I'm really glad to be able to speak with your group. Like I said, I had lots of great mentors growing up, and if I could have the opportunity to be a part of any of your journeys or provide you guys with any kind of tidbits or guidance or something that you took away from this, then that's my absolute privilege to do so. So I'm really glad to have been here with you guys. I hope that was helpful, and please reach out if any of you have other questions or anything comes to mind that you want to talk more. You all know how to reach me. You can reach me through Scarlett or on any of the social media channels. And I'd be happy to talk to you further.
It's been great having you here today. On the right of the screen, you can see some of the social media accounts on Instagram that Dr. Hakim has. So you can go and follow her work through that. And on the right, you can see our website, which the recording of this webinar will be posted on, and our email along with our Instagram and WeChat QR codes. So whenever we post our blog posts and seasonal magazines, you can receive timely updates about that. But once again, thank you all of you for attending this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Kim, again, for spending her time with us today. And I hope you all enjoy this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Have a nice
Have a nice day, everyone. Have a nice weekend.